she said, "Quit pretending we're engaged, you can't control my plans or my friends." Everyone chuckled at my expense while I just grinned and remained silent. The humiliation stung, but something deeper shifted inside me that night. A quiet realization that would change everything between us. I'm Mason, 26, and I work as a veterinary technician at a clinic in Denver where I've been for 4 years, steadily building my career while living what I thought was a committed relationship with Amber in our shared downtown apartment. 3 years together felt like we were building something real, especially since we'd been splitting rent and utilities for the past year, or so I thought until I started really paying attention to our bank statements. The incident that opened my eyes happened on a Thursday night when Amber's crew, Skylar, Madison, and Paige, came over for their weekly wine and gossip session, which usually meant I'd retreat to the bedroom with my laptop while they turned our living room into their personal therapy session. Amber had been acting different lately, more secretive with her phone, staying out later with work friends, and making these little comments about how boring our routine had become, but I chalked it up to her new job at the marketing firm and the stress of trying to impress her colleagues. That night, she dropped a bombshell during dinner prep while her friends were already opening the second bottle of wine. "So, I'm going to Vegas this weekend with the girls," she announced casually, like she was mentioning a trip to the grocery store. "Flight leaves Friday morning, back Sunday night." I paused in chopping vegetables, not because I minded her taking trips, but because we usually discussed big expenses and weekend plans together. "Vegas sounds fun," I said. "When did you guys decide this?" I didn't see any charges on our shared card. Her expression shifted immediately, that defensive look I'd been seeing more often lately. "We booked it separately. Skylar found some amazing deal and we all Venmo'd her." I nodded, continuing with dinner prep. "What airline? I can check you in tomorrow since I'll be up early for work anyway." It was an innocent offer, the kind of thing I'd done dozens of times before, but Amber's reaction was anything but innocent. "God, Mason, I can check myself in. You don't need to manage every detail of my life." The conversation felt charged suddenly, with her friends going quiet in the living room, obviously listening. "I wasn't trying to manage anything," I said calmly. "Just offering to help since I'll be awake anyway." That's when she exploded. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. Quit pretending we're engaged, you can't control my plans or my friends." The words hung in the air like a physical slap, and I heard Skylar snort with laughter from the couch. "Girl, tell him," Madison chimed in, and suddenly all 3 of her friends were giggling like they were watching some comedy show. I stood there holding a knife and half-chopped onions, looking at Amber's flushed face and realizing that this wasn't just an outburst. This was how she really felt about us, about me, about the life we'd built together. The laughter from her friends made it worse, like I was some controlling boyfriend for offering to help with a simple task. "You're right," I said quietly, setting down the knife and wiping my hands on the dish towel. "We're not engaged." I walked out of the kitchen with a calm smile, leaving Amber and her friends to their evening while something fundamental shifted inside me. The laughter followed me down the hallway, but I wasn't angry, I was calculating. For the first time in months, maybe years, I was seeing our relationship clearly, and what I saw was a woman who viewed me as a convenient roommate rather than a partner, someone who paid the bills while she lived her best life without any real commitment or appreciation. As I sat in our bedroom listening to them celebrate her Vegas trip, I started doing the math on exactly how much this relationship was actually costing me, and more importantly, I started planning what life would look like when the person who didn't consider us engaged came home to discover I'd taken her advice to heart. Friday morning came early, and I watched Amber pack her designer luggage with clothes I'd helped pay for, heading off to an airport I wouldn't be checking her into, on a trip funded by methods I was apparently not supposed to question. After she left in her Uber, I made coffee and sat down with my laptop to begin what I'd started thinking of as Operation Reality Check. But first I needed an ally who understood the legal complexities of what I was about to do. Mrs. Chun lived in the apartment 2 floors below ours and served as the building's property manager, a sharp-eyed woman in her 70s who'd immigrated from Taiwan 30 years ago and built a small real estate empire through careful attention to detail and an uncanny ability to read people's true intentions. I'd always liked her because she treated everyone fairly but didn't tolerate nonsense, and more importantly, she'd witnessed enough relationship drama in her decades of property management to recognize manipulation when she saw it. I knocked on her door around 10, finding her in her usual Friday morning routine of reviewing lease agreements while her ancient cat, Chairman Meow, supervised from his perch on her desk. "Mason, how nice to see you," she said, gesturing me inside. "Coffee? I just made a fresh pot." As we settled into her immaculate living room, I explained the situation carefully, starting with Amber's public declaration that we weren't engaged and ending with my growing realization that I'd been funding a lifestyle for someone who viewed me as a convenient roommate rather than a partner. Mrs. Chen's expression grew more serious as I talked, her sharp eyes narrowing when I mentioned the financial dynamics. "Show me the bank statements," she said bluntly, and I pulled out my phone to display 8 months of rent payments, all coming from my account, along with utilities, groceries, and the countless other expenses that somehow always fell to me. "And her name is on the lease?" she asked, reviewing the payments with the intensity of an accountant during tax season. "Both our names, but I've been paying 100% of everything since she started her new job and claimed she needed time to get financially stable." Mrs. Chen made a disgusted noise that somehow managed to convey exactly what she thought of that arrangement. "Mason, in my 40 years of property management, I've seen this same story play out dozens of times. One person treats the relationship like a free housing arrangement while the other person pays for the privilege of being taken advantage of." She stood up and walked to her filing cabinet, pulling out a thick folder labeled with our apartment number. "Here's what we're going to do," she said, spreading documents across her coffee table with the precision of a general planning a military campaign. "I'm going to review your lease agreement very carefully, and we're going to have a conversation about tenant rights, financial responsibility, and what happens when someone who contributes nothing to a household decides to bite the hand that feeds them." The plan she outlined was both elegant and devastating in its simplicity. Since I could prove I'd been the sole financial contributor for months, and since Amber had publicly declared we weren't in a committed relationship, Mrs. Chen could legitimately question whether Amber had established proper tenant rights or was simply a long-term guest who'd been living in my apartment. "The beauty of this," Mrs. Chen explained with a smile that reminded me why people respected her business acumen, "is that everything we do will be completely legal and by the book. No revenge, no drama, just proper property management procedures applied to someone who apparently doesn't understand the difference between a relationship and a free ride." I left Mrs. Chen's apartment with a clear plan and the satisfied feeling that comes from finally taking action instead of just accepting whatever scraps of respect someone decided to throw your way, knowing that when Amber returned from Vegas, she'd discover that actions have consequences and that the person who didn't want to be engaged was about to learn exactly what that meant. Saturday morning, I stood in our apartment with a clipboard, pen, and the kind of methodical focus I usually reserved for medical charts at the clinic, ready to conduct what I'd started calling the Great Inventory of Entitlement. The first step wasn't just packing Amber's belongings, it was conducting a forensic accounting of our shared life to determine exactly what she'd actually contributed versus what she'd simply claimed ownership of through proximity and assumption. I started in the bedroom, carefully examining every item and mentally cataloging who'd purchased what, a process that became increasingly eye-opening as I realized how much of our stuff was actually just mine that she'd gradually taken over. Her clothes went into boxes labeled with my new naming system: designer jeans purchased during broke phase, workout clothes for gym membership I pay for, and my personal favorite, shoes worth more than most people's car payments. The living room proved even more revealing as I rediscovered furniture I'd put in storage when Amber moved in, pieces she'd declared too masculine for her vision of our space, which apparently meant I'd paid to store my own belongings so she could redecorate with items that somehow always required my credit card despite her strong opinions about the aesthetic choices. I found receipts showing I'd spent over $3,000 on her decorating whims in the past year alone, including $400 on throw pillows that served no purpose other than making the couch uncomfortable and looking good in Instagram photos. Her books, and I use that term loosely since most were clearly purchased as props for her bookshelf aesthetic rather than actual reading material, went into a box labeled Instagram props disguised as literature, while her extensive skincare collection, worth approximately $800 based on my credit card statements, earned the label beauty products more expensive than my car payment. The kitchen revealed the most damning evidence of our lopsided arrangement: expensive organic groceries I'd purchased for her dietary restrictions, specialty appliances she'd insisted we needed but never used, and a wine collection that had somehow depleted dramatically during her girls' nights while I was working late shifts at the clinic. Every item got photographed, cataloged, and carefully packed with the precision of someone who'd finally stopped making excuses for another person's selfishness. By Sunday afternoon, I'd rented a climate-controlled storage unit across town and hired professional movers who handled everything with the efficiency of people who'd seen this exact scenario countless times before, probably wondering why it had taken me so long to figure out what was obvious to everyone else. The transformation of our apartment back into my space was remarkable. I retrieved my comfortable furniture from storage, set up my home office properly for the first time in years, and created a living environment that reflected my actual preferences rather than someone else's Instagram aesthetic. My masterstroke came Sunday evening when I visited the animal shelter where I'd been volunteering for 2 years, finally ready to adopt the senior cats I'd wanted but couldn't get because Amber claimed to be allergic, though she seemed fine around other people's pets when it was convenient for photos. Justice and Karma, both 8-year-old rescues who'd been overlooked for months because everyone wanted kittens, came home with me that night, and I swear they understood immediately that this was their forever home with someone who'd actually chosen them rather than viewing them as inconvenient obstacles to a perfect living situation. As I watched them explore their new territory while Amber posted Vegas party photos to Instagram, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, complete peace in my own space, surrounded by creatures who were grateful to be there rather than entitled to everything I provided. Sunday night, while Justice and Karma settled into their new home with the contentment of animals who finally felt secure, I began the systematic process of digital detachment that would ensure Amber's return became a lesson in accountability rather than a continuation of our one-sided arrangement. The apartment's smart lock system, which Amber had insisted we install 6 months ago because it looked more sophisticated than regular keys, became my first target as I updated the access codes and removed her phone from the authorized devices list with the satisfaction of someone finally taking control of his own living situation. I changed the Wi-Fi network name to Not Engage No Access, with the password Accountability 2024, a little touch of humor that I knew would drive home the point when she inevitably tried to connect her phone out of habit. Every streaming service we'd shared got new credentials, from Netflix to Spotify, and I made sure to document the monthly costs I'd been covering, $47 for premium everything, apparently, so someone could watch reality TV shows about people even more entitled than herself. The food delivery apps proved particularly revealing when I reviewed the order history and realized Amber had been charging $300 worth of lunches to my credit card each month. Expensive salads and smoothies that cost more than most people spend on groceries, all while claiming she was being budget-conscious about our shared expenses. I updated every password, removed her access to my accounts, and created a detailed spreadsheet that would have impressed my old accounting professor, documenting exactly $2,847 in expenses I'd covered for her over the past 8 months since she'd started her supposed financial recovery period. Mrs. Chen had been right about building security. As the sole rent payer with documented proof of financial responsibility, I had every right to update the access list and remove unauthorized long-term guests who couldn't prove their tenant status through actual contributions to the household. I installed discrete cameras in the common areas, not for surveillance but for documentation, knowing that Amber's dramatic tendencies and sense of entitlement would likely provide perfect evidence of her true character when reality finally hit her. The building's main entrance required key card access after 9 p.m., and since Amber's card was linked to my account as the primary leaseholder, Mrs. Chen and I ensured that her access would be revoked effective immediately, triggering a conversation about tenant rights that I suspected would be quite educational for someone who'd been treating a relationship like a free housing program. By midnight Sunday, every digital fortress was in place, every password changed, every account secured, and every piece of evidence carefully documented with the precision of someone who'd finally stopped making excuses for another person's behavior and started protecting himself from financial and emotional exploitation. Justice sat on my lap while I finished the last updates, purring with the deep satisfaction of an animal who recognized when someone had finally made the right choice, and I realized that this was what security felt like, not constantly worrying about someone else's expenses, reactions, or entitled demands, but simply living in peace with creatures who contributed affection instead of taking everything while giving nothing in return. Amber's initial shock transformed into pure rage within minutes, and I watched from my living room as she began pounding on the apartment door with the fury of someone who'd never been held accountable for her actions, screaming demands about her rights while threatening lawsuits that we both knew she couldn't afford and social media exposure that would only backfire spectacularly. "Mason, open this door right now. You can't just steal my stuff and lock me out. This is illegal." Her voice carried through the hallway with the hysteria of someone discovering that consequences were real and immediate, while I sat calmly recording everything through the security system with justice purring on my lap and karma supervising from her perch on the windowsill. The beauty of Mrs. Chen's approach became clear as Amber's threats grew more desperate and less coherent. Everything we'd done was completely legal, documented, and justified, which meant her tantrum was only providing evidence of her unstable behavior rather than any legitimate grievance against proper property management procedures. When the door pounding finally stopped and I heard her footsteps retreating down the hallway, I knew the real show was about to begin as Amber took her victim narrative to social media, probably crafting some sob story about being illegally evicted by a controlling ex-boyfriend who couldn't handle her independence. I didn't have to wait long. By Monday morning, her Instagram was flooded with posts about toxic men, illegal evictions, and how she was consulting lawyers about her rights as a tenant, each post more dramatic than the last and clearly designed to generate sympathy from people who didn't know the full story. That's when I unleashed my carefully prepared response, a single Instagram post that included screenshots of our shared bank account showing 8 months of me paying 100% of rent and utilities, photos of the professionally packed belongings in climate-controlled storage, documentation of the proper legal procedures we'd followed, and my personal favorite touch, adorable photos of justice and karma with the caption, "Finally found roommates who actually contribute to the household and don't treat relationships like free housing programs." The internet's response was swift and merciless as people who'd followed Amber's luxury lifestyle posts began connecting the dots between her designer purchases and someone else's bank account, with comments ranging from supportive messages for me to increasingly hostile questions about how she'd been funding her lifestyle while claiming to be broke. Her friend group, who'd laughed so loudly at my expense Thursday night, suddenly went quiet on social media as the full extent of the financial imbalance became public knowledge, and I noticed several of them quietly unfollowing her accounts as they realized they'd been complicit in mocking someone who'd been financially supporting their friend's entire existence. The most satisfying part was watching Amber's attempts to control the narrative crumble as more evidence emerged. Mutual friends began sharing their own stories about her borrowing money, expecting others to pay for dinners, and always having excuses when bills came due, painting a picture of someone who'd made entitlement a lifestyle choice rather than a temporary situation. Tuesday morning brought the inevitable phone call from Amber's hastily hired lawyer, a conversation that lasted exactly 7 minutes before he politely withdrew from representing her case after reviewing my documentation and realizing she had no legal standing whatsoever and would likely owe me money if we went to court. The lawyer's withdrawal seemed to break something fundamental in Amber's understanding of how the world worked, and by Wednesday she was forced to move back to suburban Phoenix with her parents, her social media influence crashing as followers realized her entire lifestyle had been funded by someone else's generosity rather than her own success. Her parents, who I'd met twice during our relationship, apparently weren't thrilled about their 25-year-old daughter moving back home with a storage unit full of designer clothes and no actual plan for financial independence, a reality check that probably stung worse than losing access to my apartment. The vindication came in unexpected ways over the following weeks. Madison, Amber's friend who'd laughed loudest at my expense during the Vegas announcement, reached out with a private message that restored some of my faith in human decency. "I owe you an apology," she wrote. "We all knew Amber was using you financially, but we thought it was your choice and that you were happy with the arrangement. After seeing everything that happened, I realize we were complicit in something really unfair, and I'm sorry we laughed when you were just trying to be a supportive partner." Her honesty meant more than she probably realized, and it confirmed what I'd suspected, that Amber's behavior had been obvious to everyone except me, probably because I'd been too close to the situation to see the manipulation clearly. 6 months later, my life had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined during those dark months of feeling unappreciated and financially drained by someone who viewed my kindness as weakness rather than love. The veterinary clinic promoted me to senior technician with a substantial raise after I successfully managed a complex surgery case that saved a dog's life, and Justice and Karma had become unofficial office mascots who provided therapy for anxious pet owners while demonstrating that rescue animals make the most grateful companions. My dating life improved dramatically when I met Sarah at a volunteer event for the animal shelter, a fellow veterinarian who insisted on splitting every expense from our first coffee date and whose idea of a perfect evening involved hiking with rescue dogs rather than shopping for things we couldn't afford. Sarah's reaction to hearing about Amber was both validating and educational. "She trained you to accept scraps," she said matter-of-factly. Healthy relationships involve two people contributing equally, not one person funding another person's fantasy lifestyle while being made to feel grateful for the privilege. The apartment, now truly my sanctuary, featured photos of Justice and Karma alongside my growing collection of certificates from the veterinary continuing education courses I could finally afford, proving that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all but simply building the life you deserve with people who appreciate your efforts rather than exploiting them. Amber's social media eventually went quiet, her last post being a generic motivational quote about new beginnings that generated exactly 3 likes, while my own life filled with genuine relationships, professional success, and the deep satisfaction that comes from finally recognizing your own worth and refusing to settle for anything less than mutual respect and appreciation.